and welcome to the MHR podcast. I'm Andy.
I'm Alice.
So if you joined us last week, you would have seen that we started the first in a series of kind of deep dives into our 2024 predictions.
Yes.
So we were looking at the road to 24 kind of roadmap for businesses and employers. So we looked at payroll, and we looked at a load of issues that we think, or the risks that businesses will face with payroll, and what we think the solutions are, right?
Yes.
This week, I thought we could do part 2, which is a deep dive into all things HR.
And that should be one that we can talk quite a lot about, since we do work for HR, payroll, finance and learning business.
Exactly, right. And on top of
Handy.
that, if you haven't already downloaded the guide and read it yourself because of our last podcast, you can do so, because that's what we're referencing this week, but we're looking at the HR section. So what are the key HR predictions? What are the main risks and drivers behind HR coming into 2024? And what are the potential solutions that we at MHR, because of the research that we've conducted and the expertise that we have, has suggested?
Yeah, I'm quite interested on this one actually, because we do speak a lot. I think a lot of our references, or kind of our personal stories, always stem back to how we've experienced in the HR world. But then to look at the predictions for 2024, I'm interested to see how much has actually changed from last year, or
Yeah.
if there is much of one really.
We'll see, right?
Yeah.
So I will pose the topic thusly. Alice, did you know that more than 60% of business leaders see HR as purely an administrative role?
60, more than 60.
60%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's quite a large number, isn't it?
It is, yeah, more than I expect actually.
The tone I'm getting from that is the kind of this assumption that there's a larger misunderstanding of the level of work required in the HR function, or the impact that it has. And if a large, quite a significant chunk of your kind of business leadership team are seeing or underestimating that, you're
Yeah.
probably putting that team under pressure, or their work is not being seen in the right way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that probably applies to quite a few roles around the business. But thinking specifically about HR, I think first assumption is quite admin heavy,
Yeah.
probably a lot of manual process. So obviously we speak about digitalisation in that team. But actually that day-to-day of what goes on in HR and then the wider remit, you probably even couldn't guess how big their remit does go.
And maybe that's one of the problems, right? Because it's very people driven, it's very social driven.
Yes,
There's a
true.
lot of that, so it's not just about process and it's not just about administration, but maybe this stuff doesn't get seen or recorded in the right way, so you can't quantify the impact that level of work has. So actually what you're only seeing is the administrative impact, because that's how you're recording it. Actually, if you had software in place, like people software in place or HR software in place, that was kind of able to capture data on the social or the communication or the recognition retention elements of the work,
Yeah.
actually you're highlighting all the other functions that a HR team does that might not be recorded by previous old processes.
Yeah, and I think that's something that was mentioned quite a lot by you and Emma last year, was that data input on people's software. Because like I say, I think a lot of it was still kept on spreadsheets, or it kind of just would fall within some sort of
Or
pot
anecdotal,
somewhere.
everything
Or,
HR
yeah,
could
that's
be kind
true.
of, we've talked to this person, this is what they've said. Well, actually, how are we recording this? How are we adding a metric to that? How are we creating that and using that as, how are we making useful data that can help inform how our business is working?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, accurate and then in real
Yeah.
time. So, like you say, it's bringing it to light, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly how much is going through that department.
So, reflecting on the statement that we've just made, it's no wonder that the biggest prediction that our guide is suggesting this year for businesses and employers will be that there will be a great HR burnout if businesses don't address the capacity and the talent issues that they currently have. So, as the guide goes on to explain, one of the most worrying trends that the world of work is facing is HR burnout. More than half of HR professionals are considering quitting in the next year. Organisations will have to either prepare for a sudden massive talent gap or find ways to help their HR teams avoid burnout.
Right.
So this kind of goes to what we've talked about in previous episodes as well, right? If retention is an issue, then
Yeah.
you're going, and we talked about this in relation to payroll as well,
Yes,
right?
we have,
Retention,
yeah.
retention,
Yeah.
retention. If you're losing that expertise, then suddenly you're going to have talent gaps where you have areas of the team that don't know how these things are done. But
true.
also you're shifting the responsibility of that these gaps are creating onto your already burnt out team. So if you can't retain, then you're going to have an issue. But also, if you have gaps, then you're putting more pressure on an already pressured team. Especially if, as we've already discussed, you're not recognising the work that they do or understand the level of it.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So you're not really getting a clear picture of the resource that you have available or how stretched it is.
Yeah, exactly. So I wondered, is there a definition of burnout? Because I think we can imagine what that is, but what does it actually mean in business terms.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you can look at it from a kind of a well-being perspective. You can look at it from, you can look at it from an employee engagement perspective. And I suppose it's about employee satisfaction. It's about employee engagement, and also feeling that an employee has control of their workload and feels that the business is supporting them to deliver the work they need.
Yeah.
When you remove those things, suddenly you're dropping in productivity because an employee feels like they can't perform to the standard that their role is required. They feel under pressure, and ultimately they're going to spiral.
Yeah,
right?
so ultimately it's avoiding or preventing that exhaustion, and like you say, avoiding poor performance, which ultimately is going to affect the job, the team, and ultimately the business overall.
So, recognising that there is a problem here with burnout, our guide goes on to explain that what has caused this uptick in kind of lack of retention and the issues of burnout comes down to changes in the world of work. HR professionals have a lot more on their plate than we currently appreciate. Again, it goes back to recognising that this is more than an admin task, right?
Yeah.
They have to learn in they have to learn a lot in a very little time, thanks to things like the pandemic and the shift to remote work. So suddenly the world of work is completely changing.
It
Our
definitely
HR
has.
processes need to adapt to do this, but we have to do it quickly. How do we do that? How do we get that expertise in? This is all new for a lot of people. So suddenly your resource is being stretched, right?
Yeah.
And to support this, to support the comment on remote work, one of our colleagues, so Graham Fisher, a senior product designer at MHR, says remoteness doesn't always help. While remote work can cut down on the stresses related to commutes, for example,
Right.
it can also have teams feeling disconnected from each other. And that they don't have the support network around them that they need. Providing resources to connect your team together and spaces that they can meet in person is always very helpful. And I suppose that's what we talk about with our HR software, right? So recognising that a lot of industries have to work remotely, or the expectation is that they should work remotely now for some industries. If you have to do that, what software can you put in place where you can still hold that social communication element?
Yeah.
So People First, for example, it treats your HR software like a social platform. So now it's like a social media. I can go into work and I'm getting live feed of how people are working, what they're doing, what they need. I can do that to hold my check-ins. I can do that to hold meetings. I can do that to set my own goals. So if I treat my HR platform like a social media piece, I feel like I'm always connected to my team. I feel like I'm being social. So I don't feel isolated. I don't feel remote.
Yeah, and one thing with the People First software that we use is everything's centralised. So we have all our HR, we have the check-ins, like I say, in the social feed. It kind of, even though everyone can be spread across the UK or globally, we have that one central platform that everything is that go-to. And I think that is what brings people together. You can have Teams chats, you can, I think probably across businesses, they have a lot of platforms they're using to encourage collaboration and communication.
Yeah.
But actually, I think what's most important is you just have the one that everyone can go to, everyone contributes to. It does make the difference. But like you say, I think having that community and closeness with your colleagues or with the business, hopefully it'll prevent that burnout because you're then communicating, aren't you? You're more aware of what's going on, different pressures that can be around the business. But ultimately, it makes the workday just that bit easier, I think, isn't it?
You've got to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy the social element. So again, in response to the burnout, we need to be conscious that retention is an issue, and if we're not quantifying the actual responsibility for HR team or we don't understand it, we're only going to overload our team. And if the world of work is changing, so people are working remotely or differently, we need to make sure that social element's still there so people feel like they can communicate, whether it's because they've got an issue or because they want to socialise and they want to enjoy their world of work. Now, we're biased. So we work for a HR tech, payroll, finance company, right?
Yeah.
So we're immediately going to, there's some technology for that. But it turns out that our guide has also said that's exactly what we should be looking at. Whether it's that you want to take on something like People First or HR tech transformation or whatever you want to do, the suggestion is from our experts is that digital transformation is the way forward. People are always going to move far apart. The work is always going to get more flexible. Things are always going to be a lot more dynamic. So one constant you can have is technology that helps connect the dots.
Indeed,
right?
Definitely.
It was always a well-known excuse of why things couldn't change, right? We don't just have technology. Well, I think in this day and age that would be a poor excuse because we don't know there's a better way, right?
Okay.
If you've got a smartphone, you can access the internet.
Yeah.
You can access an app. So with new HR software, you can simplify a lot of processes, which will ease burnout. And that's a quote from Ian Dakin, our senior product manager at MHR.
Yeah,
right?
and I think putting that into an example, if you have a HR issue, you want to speak to HR, like I say, if you've got it on a mobile app and you can just, send them a message
Yeah.
or log it in
Yeah.
the software and they can come back to you. It, like you said, we brought up that point of a lot of conversation with HR probably just happen in a room. They're not necessarily noted down in software where it can be monitored and tracked or kept a record of. So actually, it's kind of having that process a lot easier. It
Yeah.
can probably lessen mistakes. I'm not saying that there may be some, but
Yeah.
it can lessen mistakes. Probably issues might get solved quicker because
Yeah.
there's that track record. And then also, I think for HR teams, they probably appear more accessible as well.
Yeah. So final comment I'll say on burnout then is that it's recommended, and the recommendations we make in our guide and our experts here at MHR is that HR teams start treating themselves in the same way they would their own employees, right?
Right.
They have to identify the issue, seek support, and most of all be kind to themselves. Now,
Okay.
if you find yourself in this position, it's like stress management workshops are incredibly useful, as can taking annual leave. Like many HR professionals, that we speak to, they fail to take in their allocated time bit of the year because it's because they don't feel like that they need to do their work, so they're not putting the importance of their own time in. They're putting other people's because
Right.
that's the employees they're looking after, right? So get it booked, have a break, make sure you're practicing what you preach, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you are going to burn out, and you can't manage a workforce if the team that's trying to manage that workforce is burning out.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
else is that team?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope. So to summarise, the HR industry is facing a real turning point on burnout. Organisations need to get ahead of it and consider investing in ways to reduce the risk in order to protect themselves from a talent deficit.
Right.
That is the
Okay.
burnout in a nutshell. How do you feel about that? Feel
There's a
like
lot
I've
to take
answered
on,
it?
isn't there?
We've answered
But
it,
I think
reckon.
so. We
Yeah.
definitely have.
So on one of those, and I wanted to talk lightly about that, so I think that's the main topic we could talk about this week. But
Yeah.
there's also a couple of other things that have spun out from our report that's really interesting.
Okay.
We talked about that a lot last year. It was the use of AI. Now,
Okay.
And the reason I bring it up is because we've just talked about the fact that you're going to have a talent deficit, right? Retention is a problem. So your experience and expertise will dwindle, and that might be a problem,
Yeah, that's true.
which means you're going to have less people to do more work.
Yeah.
If that's going to be a problem, instead of being fearful of AI, do we need to, as a business, look at how we can use technology, digital transformation, and AI to automate processes to make sure the things that are really bogging down your employees and get them stuck in the weeds
Yeah.
can be automated, those processes can be fixed, so the limited resource that you do have, if it is limited, can be focused in the areas that actually make the most impact to the business. How do you
Right.
unburden your HR team with software and transformation using AI to make their lives easier and stop them burning out?
Yeah.
I think
So-
AI is the answer in many ways from the research that
Yeah.
we've put forward.
So you're kind of referring to that blended workforce, aren't you? The
Yeah.
workforce AI approach. But again, it's looking at the value of AI. So like I say, not fearing it, but kind of thinking from my terms, when I think of AI, it's almost an unlimited possibility of what it could do. So in that sense, it's almost don't write it off, explore the options. Like you say, there will be value in it somewhere,
Yeah.
but it might be different from another business. It might be different from another team. It's what works for you and your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about changing perceptions as well, right? It's not about saying AI is taking people's roles or jobs,
No,
because it doesn't have
no.
to. And we've realised, and we've looked at this all year, like AI can't do what humans can do.
Yes.
It can do what humans tell it to do. So we
Exactly.
need to utilise it to support humans, right?
Yeah.
So moving into 2024, HR departments will need to work closely with other departments to figure out how AI can help them. Because
Okay.
actually, not only do you need AI in your HR processes, but HR can be a driver for how AI can come into an organisation.
Okay.
As we'll hire this AI bot, or how can we use AI technology to alleviate stress across the organisation?
Yeah.
All of these teams are burnt out. All of these teams are under-resourced. We can't afford to recruit for all of these areas, but there is technology there. So what
Yeah.
role does HR play in recognising a talent shortage in an organisation and finding options with AI that can supplement those teams rather than feel like that technology is a replacement for talent?
Yeah, most definitely.
So I wanted to talk about that because I think it's really important, because I think last year we went from being scared of AI, now we need to see it as a supplementary tool to support a workforce.
Yeah.
And the last thing, and I think this is really important that we should talk about this week, was recognizing there was talent shortages and we need to build new talent, is
Right.
how can HR teams work with the rest of the organization to build a more diverse workforce?
I see. I thought the diversity would come into play here, but it's an important one because I guess it has been a top priority for HR departments over the past couple of years. But like you say, if you're coming into the new year, you want to be looking at your pipeline of how can you be getting the talent into your company, and also I guess in some ways broadening the cultural aspect of your company because you can enhance it, can't you? Really?
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's broader than you think. I mean, obviously, if you're not to quote how the guy puts it, improving diversity is just a matter isn't just a matter of promoting or hiring candidates from diverse backgrounds.
Okay.
It's a cultural shift that needs to start from the moment you start to looking to hire new employees. So it's about making sure that your organisation is set up in a way to open itself into new opportunities, new ways of looking, new perspectives, so you can make sure that your new talent coming in is going to push your business ahead and get you out of your own bubble, get you out of your own little silo, right? So diversity and inclusion has been a top priority for HR departments for several years. We all know this, right?
Yes.
So the most importantly of all, it's ensuring that you have a pipeline of talent that drives you from day one, right? So
it's almost, if you're looking at that pipeline, you maybe want to take a step back and look at new places to be recruiting from.
Are we always hiring the same type of people? Are we hiring the same talent bases? Are we hiring from the same backgrounds? Are we hiring in the same perspectives? If we are, we're not going to expect our company to grow or be enriched or take on fresh perspectives and challenge the market, right? So tips that have been shared, such are opening up remote work will let you reach talent pools you ordinarily couldn't access.
Okay.
Finding new places to promote roles can also help you go into untapped talent pools. And then once you've established a more diverse hiring pipeline, you'll need to consider how you're going to support employees from a range of backgrounds, right? So whether that's for a robust inclusion policy or offering additional training or encouraging social mobility. You have to recognise you can't also retain and encourage culturally diverse employees if you don't understand their requirements, their needs, or their expectations.
Yeah, it's very well
Cool.
said.
So the guide goes into a lot more detail about a lot of things HR, but there were the 3 points I thought we could talk about, and I think it's really important. So
Definitely.
Workforce diversity.
Yeah.
The use of AI to support and how HR teams can support the wider business with this. And how we can avoid burnout.
Great. And like I say, if anyone wants to take a deeper dive into what we've been talking about today, the guide is on our website, mhrglobal.com.
Yeah, we'll make sure there's a link to it in the page about this podcast as well. We are very lucky here at MHR. We have contributors from across the business, industry professionals as well, all quoting in the guide, giving you that research. So it's not just bias. This is fresh research talking about what we can predict. It is worth your time reading. And if you want to discover more about what we do here at MHR generally, obviously check us out at mhrglobal.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.